Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's Good Echoing Green's Black Innovator Talks. My name is Rachel Danielle Lattimore, and I get the privilege to serve on our programs team here at Echoing Green. And tonight, I have the honor of serving as your moderator. Now, for those of you who are new to Echoing Green, allow me to share a little more about our work. For 30 years, we've been a leader in finding and supporting transformational leaders at an early stage. We invest deeply in the growth of their ideas and leadership as they work to tackle some of the world's biggest problems. At Echoing Green, community is what we do best. And we are committed to building a dynamic ecosystem that will support our fellows' work both now and long into the future. And to that end, with the support of the American Family Insurance Institute for Corporate and Social Impact, Echoing Green launched Black Innovator Talks earlier this year. Now, we could not have pulled off tonight's event without their support and the continued partnership of Spelman College and our friends at Twitter. So if you're new to this conversation series, you may be asking, what is Black Innovator Talks? This series features perspectives from social justice leaders all across the United States and delves into the important intersection of innovation and Black futures. By bringing social entrepreneurs together with other leaders in the tech, media, and social and racial justice sectors, Black Innovator Talks challenges and encourages us to collectively reimagine systems and movements as we create solutions that advance impact within our communities. The theme for tonight's two talks is For Us, By Us. The notion of innovating for Black futures is not foreign within our community. I mean, we are standing on the shoulders of giants such as Elijah McCoy, Madam C.J. Walker, Garrett A. Morgan, Bell Hooks, Charles Drew, and Kimberly Crenshaw, to name just a few. And in a time when articulations of progress can be too incremental, too limited, and too rooted in the absence of injustice, we are asking the question, what will our dreams be made of? In the first of two conversations tonight, I will be joined by three phenomenal Echoing Green Fellows who are bold, they are creative, and they're reimagining the agenda for Black futures. Our second conversation will feature Jamira Burley and our very own Tiffany Thompson. I would like to first bring up our first panelist, Atira Griffin. Atira is a 2019 fellow and the founder of BOND, which stands for Building Our Nation's Daughters. BOND works to engage, mentor, and build single mothers in Baltimore to cultivate positive mother-daughter relationships, strengthen single mother families, and lead advocacy to ensure every single mother household has equitable access to opportunities. Next, we have Deanna Van Buren, and she's a 2016 fellow and the co-founder of Designing Justice, Designing Spaces. It's a nonprofit that harnesses the power of design and development to transform people and communities. Deanna is a national leader in formulating and advocating for restorative justice centers, a radical transformation of justice architecture. And last but certainly not least, we have Alan Woods. And Alan is a 2017 fellow and the co-founder of Mortar. Mortar is Cincinnati's entrepreneurship hub, and it aims to create diverse communities by enabling Black, Brown, and women entrepreneurs to access the resources needed to start and run successful businesses. I hope that you will welcome our panelists to this stage, and we are excited to get started in this conversation. So as we're talking about innovating for Black futures, we know that Black leaders have always had the ideas and innovations to reimagine and build just systems that work for all. And so in many ways, all of your work is fulfilling the dreams of leaders from our past. And we want to know what frame of inspiration led you to action in starting your organization, and were there leaders or movements or blueprints that inspired your organization's vision? Atira, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm so happy to be here just to share and talk in this wonderful conversation that is for us and by us and about us, which is so necessary. To answer your question, Rachel D, I always share with folks where the inspiration for building our nation's daughters or bond came from, and it really came from our community, right? I was working at the Baltimore Leadership School for Young Women, and I was serving as dean of students. And a lot of girls would come into my office with concerns and thoughts and feelings and emotions and pouring, spilling their guts, the way that they do. And I, drawing on my own relationship with my mother and my grandmother, would ask them if they have shared those things with their maternal figures in their life. And it broke my heart to hear them say, no, they had not. And so for Bond, I really leaned on one, the relationship that I had with my grandmother and my mother, and the example that they set for me about how we as Black women are to relate to each other, how we are to support each other, how they poured into me as a young Black girl so that I could sit here on this panel today and talk about an organization that I started that's probably beyond my grandmother's wildest dreams. And to not see that happening in the relationships that these young Black girls had with their moms, in particular single moms, broke my heart. And to not find anything out there that was already built for them let me know that I had to go and do it. Like there was a need that had to be filled, and I needed to go and fill it. And I pulled my mom along with me for the ride, of course, in true fashion.
Yeah, I love that, Atiri. We've had many conversations, both of us coming from a single mother household. And so I wish that Bond was around, when I was growing up, because I'm sure that it would have definitely benefited the relationship between my mother and I. Thank you so much for sharing that. Deanna, let's go to you. What about you?
You, Rachel, thank you. I love being on in this panel, and I love being in this community. Echoing Green is one of my favorite communities, period, hands down. So I think, some ways similar to Atira, I think I saw two things at the same time. I saw something called the public interest design movement emerging, which was like, oh, design is actually for everybody, right? Good design actually changes our lives. But I saw that it was led predominantly by white men. And then at the same time, I saw Fania Davis and Angela Davis speak about restorative justice on Martin Luther King's birthday, 2007, at the Taylor Memorial Methodist Church in West Oakland. I will never forget it. And that day I was like, oh, this is a solution. This is a solution that I could apply public interest design thinking to. What would it look like if we lived in a world where restorative justice was the primary way of addressing harm in our communities rather than incarcerating people and seeking retribution? And how can we bypass the structural racism of this situation? And that seemed like a solution. And I've been committed to that ever since, and was the beginning of designing justice, designing spaces.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't even imagine that day. And I love how you remember everything about it, where you were, the date.
It was all hot and stuff. It was like hot and sweaty and like packed out with Black folks like trying to dance. It was like, it was great.
That's amazing. I love that. Thank you so much, Deanna. Alan, talk to us. What about you?
So for me, the kind of epiphany moment that we had was something that I like to call gentrified piece. And what we discovered was there was a community called Over the Rhine based in Cincinnati, Ohio. And there was a new, we'll call it soul food for a lack of a better term, restaurant that opened. It was not opened by people who look like me. And what we understood was that this had been a Black neighborhood for so long, and now it was starting to see some shifts. And we knew that there were grandmothers and aunties and all kind of people who lived in this community who could outcook this restaurant and every other restaurant that was new to the neighborhood. But what we understood is though they had the gift, the talent and ability, what they didn't have was the access to capital or the actual know-how to start a business or the network or all of these other things. And so for us, there was a light bulb moment that was recognizing that these are the barriers that exist for entrepreneurs in our community. And we wanted to figure out how to take four specific, barriers that we identified, which was, know-how, network, mentorship, and physical space and access to capital. So we took those four barriers and we wanted to figure out how to create opportunities from those. So for us, it was that moment of realizing that there was something happening and that the people in our community were being intentionally left behind. And we wanted to do what we could to give people an opportunity to pursue their passions.
Yeah, that's so key, right? Like understanding these barriers are super important. I mean, we talked about this in our bridge span group report, right? Like it is critical to understand where do we have gaps, where are there barriers, and then how do we then create solutions to address those, right? It's not enough to identify them, right? It's doing the work, right, Alan? It's figuring out how do we create the space, how do we create the resources, because there's talent here, and we want to cultivate that. We want to give the talent an opportunity to really kind of manifest this greatness that they hold. And so as we think about that, I'm curious to know, and this is open to anyone on the panel, as you're reimagining an agenda for Black futures, you know, it requires you to be bold, creative. It requires inclusive solutions, whether it is a single mother mentoring program, justice architecture, or an academy for Black entrepreneurs. What have you found to be your approach to designing processes and outcomes that are rooted in racial equity? Alan, you talked a little bit about that just now, but opening this up to the rest of the panel, can you talk to us about your design process?
So first and foremost for us, like I mentioned, there were the four barriers, and we had to have conversations with the community to find out, you know, if there were additional ones. And even as we continue to expand, you know, we started this program, like I said, in one neighborhood in Cincinnati. And for us, that was all that we needed, you know, but we understood as we started to do the program that there were other people who were like, yo, like, well, what about our neighborhood? So we have actually started to expand. So we're in 6 neighborhoods in Cincinnati, and we're also in 4 cities outside of Cincinnati as well. But the first thing that we do in any of those scenarios is that we do a session that's called vocal, where for one, we want to talk to the community. That is in the work that we do, and there, which is adjacent to community development. The last thing that happens in most scenarios with community development is people having conversations with the people who are already there. And so we didn't want to mirror any you know, strategies of colonization and just show up places like, yo, here we are, we got something and you don't like it, you know. So we wanted to sit down and have conversations and say, what are the challenges that you're having? And that is how we actually develop our plan and design what we do in communities, is by working with the, you know, people who are grassroots operations and people who are entrepreneurs who are already in the neighborhood, because it might look different in one neighborhood than it does in another one. So I think that that's an important part of our process.
Mhm. That's so key. That's so key. That's why we support proximate leaders, right? I mean, people who are closest to the ground, are closest to the problems, are also the ones closest to the solutions. And so that work is just so exciting to us. Atira, I'd love to hear you talk about your process.
Absolutely. And I'm so on track with Alan when I think about how Bond even started in the first place. One of the first very local grants that we received, we used to have a brunch, a single mother daughter brunch, where we had single moms and daughters come in and participate in restorative circle. And in those circles, we actually asked them, you know, what hopes do you have for yourself as a single mom? What hopes do you have for your daughter? And vice versa for the daughter. And then also, what has been supportive of your growth and development as a single mom or daughter of a single mom, and what has not? What would you like to see out of programming? What do you feel like is missing? And so before we even started creating a program within itself or an organization or what have you, we went straight back to the community. Even though my mother and everyone on my staff is a part of the single mother daughter community, the Black single mother daughter community, we still went back to our own community to ask. So I just kind of want to put out there, like, don't make this assumption that you already know the answers just because you share the identity or you have the same type of lived experience. It's not cookie cutter like that. It's not an automatic thought.
Yep.
The other thing that we're doing in Bond and have continued to do is think outside of the norms and structures that are put in place when you think about operating a nonprofit. So I'm in Baltimore City. Baltimore City is beautiful, resilient, a city of neighborhoods, and also a city that is full of nonprofits galore. And a lot of these nonprofits are white led, and they're white led working in Black communities. And they're white led working in Black communities using white ideals and white practices, right? And so I'm sitting with my board and we are just forming, and we're talking about what we as Black women bring to Bond, what Bond's special sauce is, and what Black women's special sauce on a board is. Like, how is this board going to operate? What are our titles? How do we describe ourselves? What words and ways of being do we use? What practices do we put in place that are completely a departure from the white supremacist ideals and white society's ideals of how a business should operate, and meets the needs of the organization and our community that we serve? And so the main thing that we're doing is starting to just remove this feeling that we need to subscribe to that way of being and doing things in business in order to fit in order to get funding, in order to be seen. It's not true. If we continue to be authentically ourselves, authentically, beautifully Black in Bond, then we will attract those people who want to fund our business, and we will continue to grow and meet the needs of our community.
Yeah. I love that, Atira. And, we talk about that. I think that that is so important. You have to stay true to who you are, right? Deanna, can you talk to us about some of the things that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as an architect, our processes of engaging community and this reimagining, like radical reimagining, is just what we do, right? I mean, it's we use architecture tools from drawing to model making, small scale. We do full scale model mock-ups and model. We get real serious, right? We're not doing sticker dot voting. We're not doing Post-its. I'm handing you a glue gun and an X-Acto knife, and you're getting in there and you're going to show me what it is that your vision is telling you. And I think that it's a co-learning process for us because our communities have been completely kept out of the building of the built environment. And the built environment is structurally racist in its construction, and it's been harming us. And we have not had any agency in its development. So we need the communities we're working in, not just to provide input on what they need, but to understand real estate development, to understand design, to understand urban planning and urban design. So we are teaching the communities we work in as they teach us. And we're able to code and analyze that data. We code and analyze visual data. We return with options, like here's what we heard you say, here are all the things, there's different ways we can look at this, and we develop it together. And we have a new program called Designers on Deck, where we're training local community groups because we work nationally and we have to move at the speed of trust. And with COVID, we can't be on the ground. And so we are training designers on deck to lead that, and with systems impacted people at the front of that leadership, and have a director of community engagement who is a community organizer. And we partner a lot with community organizers on the ground as well to do these processes. It's essential. And if you don't do our concept development process, which is what we call it, we won't work with you.
Wow. Wow, that's powerful. You said this statement that I love, moving at the speed of trust. I absolutely love that. I think that that's brilliant. And so just kind of shifting just a little bit as we're talking about trust, we have a very long way to go, but the funding and philanthropy space has started to recognize how a lack of centering racial equity leads to poor return on impact. Right. So what are some of the examples that you've either experienced or seen of effective trust-based giving that invests in Black leaders? And then where are some examples where you think the field can speed up and improve in this work?
So I don't say that just because of this particular platform, but Echoing Green is 100% an organization that is looking for people that are not traditionally probably going to get an opportunity. If we're being 100% honest, there are a lot of people who are invested in as fellows that this is their first opportunity, that someone has taken them seriously, which is why it's always really in demand. And I think that the way that you not only find, the next talent, for the next generation, but also invest in them financially, but then also invest in them in every other kind of way. So it's through building the network. It's through making sure that we have the tools and resources. It's from, being able to learn from other people who are like-minded and people who are not like-minded. I think oftentimes we gravitate towards people who are like-minded and say, hey, we want to learn from them. But oftentimes it's a great opportunity to be in a room with people who are not like you and don't have the same background, to learn from them as well. And I think that Echoing Green kind of pulls together this huge hodgepodge of different people from different backgrounds who all respect each other and come together to do that. And I think that, funders could learn from the way that you do that, and the questions that you ask and the intentionality and the authenticity that comes with it, where you don't ask us to come in and shift who we are to fit into your mold. It is, hey, come in, be who you are, but we're going to help you be the better version of who you are. And I think that if more funders and partners had that attitude of, we want to help you improve in the ways that you see that you need to improve, and we're going to also offer some advice along the way. I think that, in our world, it would be a lot easier for us to have those conversations. I think that a lot of times when we talk to funders or partners, in the past, there have been a lot of times, depending on who you are, the type of organization you are, some people they have not found that part of themselves that allows themselves to be bold and speak up for themselves and like really attach to, this is who I am, this is who I need you to fund. And, if that's not what you're trying to fund, then, keep it moving. I think a lot of times when you're a new organization, you're like, yo, I need to get this money because I have a staff that I'm trying to take care of. I got, they got families. And you start to really think about, things that you shouldn't have to think about as a Black-led or woman-led organization. So I think if more partners and funders could shift their thinking and stop trying to make us be like them, but instead embrace who we are and just help us to magnify that, I think that we would all win in that, perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think I have to echo the point that Echoing Green was my first big funder, right? Um, and doing the work as a Black woman for Black women and girls specifically, it is exponentially harder to get funding.
Yeah.
One, to get people to listen to your idea, even because funding work that uplifts, not empowers, cultivates the power we already have within us as Black women it's not sexy. It's not something that has a lot of research out there about it and the impacts of it. And so funders and foundations would often not gravitate to bond because of that, because it wasn't a headline yet. It wasn't something that people were paying attention to yet. And I'll call it out, Black women have always been at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to caring for our issues, our pain, our concerns, and how we are doing in the community. And in order to truly make sure that the Black community itself advances, we must start to center Black women and girls. We must start to center Black women and femmes, just like keeping it 100%. And that's not what has been done. And so I would get questions like, well, what about Black boys? And I love my Black men. I love my Black boys, and I love Black women. And it should be a both and. It is not a either or. And I think we as organizational founders and leaders can continue to push that philanthropy community to say, no, you will fund both. You will not make us choose which one you want to fund. You will not continue to make us fight over this pot of money based on our gender identities. You will fund both in order for this community to continue to thrive and grow. And so I think that is the biggest challenge that I've seen. I was ecstatic and over the moon about Echoing Green, seeing Bond for what it was, and also seeing me, because I also felt seen. I'm a part of this community. that I'm working with. So you fund Bond, you're also funding little Atira, little Elisa, little Veronica. That was my grandmother and my mother. And so we're honoring those who came before us when we do that. And that's why I always sing the praises of Echoing Green, because not only was it the money, it's like you said, the network, the community, the people I've been connected to. And since then, even though I applied before, I've been able to get another fellowship with Open Society Institute in Baltimore City. And so I know that a lot of that is because I carry Echoing Green's name and validation, honestly, with me when I walk into these rooms. So I would say to the philanthropy community, open your ears to the community, not just the researchers, not just the headlines of what we see other institutions funding, not just what would make your portfolio easier to handle. Just because it looks like a risk, if there are continuous amounts of people coming in and saying this needs to be funded, we need to center this type of work, it's time to do that. It's time to do that work.
Yes. Okay. See, that was a pass the plate. Like if we were in a Black church, we'd be passing the plate right now.
Listen, put me on that collections crew. I'll get the funders. Come on.
Right. Yes. Snaps and all of that. So, yes. Thank you, Atira. Deanna, how about you?
I've been seeing some powerful things that philanthropy's been doing, and I've also been advising philanthropy lately on how they need to push themselves. Philanthropy essentially is risk capital. That's how I look at it. When Echoing Green funded my organization, that was a risk, and it was a smart risk. And without them, I wouldn't be talking to you here today. Instant legitimacy, right? As a Black female architect, only one of 500 licensed in the country, you better believe I need some risk capital because people are not trying to have it. So there's that. And I've seen philanthropy lately. It's been pretty powerful watching philanthropy support broad-based community organizers, with ourselves included, to leverage the power with municipalities to close jails, to stop them. Yeah. Right. And so that's been pretty amazing to see the way that we can come in with philanthropic dollars and say to government, you're going to have to close this down and we're going to reimagine it and repurpose it. And we're seeing that in LA and in Atlanta. The other thing that I'm talking to philanthropy that they haven't done enough of is to take a first risk and put capital into capital works projects, right? Communities need, architecture is expensive. You have to be the first investor and be willing to take a loss. Mm-hmm. And you need to combine together. And frankly, if you are sponsoring a nonprofit, buy them a building. Put your money where your mouth is. Buy them infrastructure. I'm tired of the funding of programs with no funding of place. Ooh. And it brings them down. How many nonprofits do you moved around 8 and 9 times, getting pushed out of places because they can't afford the rent, they can't afford to own. There's no. Philanthropy needs to support both program and place. We will not thrive without place. Place matters, and they have not been funding it, not the way they need to.
Place matters. Yes, I think we just keep passing this plate around. I think we just passing this proverbial plate around. It's so true, right? Like, I mean, a lot of these nonprofits are struggling just to meet their financial goals, right? Like they're just struggling to do the work. And so supporting infrastructure, supporting architecture, supporting places where they can actually be in community, do the work is extremely important. And so, you talked about, Deanna, how you are advising and talking to these folks, right? Like sharing what you know and pushing them. And so let's kind of shift the conversation now to like, how do we redefine gatekeeping, right? How is social innovation currently serving as a tool to disrupt historically biased narratives and establish norms? If anyone wants to take that question, how is social innovation doing that? And your
or not doing it.
Or not doing it, right? Like, or not doing it. Yeah. What have you been seeing?
Rachel, can you say more when you say social innovation, where what point of view you're coming from? That would help me a little bit. Maybe Atira and Alan totally get it, but I need more.
Yeah, so if
Right.
if we're thinking about like the work that you're doing, I guess that maybe that's a better way to frame it. Like based on the work that you're doing, and the folks that you're currently serving, like how are you using it as a tool to disrupt historically biased narratives and established norms?
So this is really fun for me to talk about because it came out of nowhere. But when you're doing the work, right, and you're going about your business, like Alan was saying, they had that one neighborhood. Where was it, in Cincinnati, and that was all they needed. And then other people came like, hey, we need you too. I think being in the space and doing the work well, to Deanna's point, like because sometimes it's not done well, but doing the work well, taking care of the community, making sure that there's growth and progress for the community you're serving, others will recognize that and want to come either on board as volunteers, want to support the mission, or want to amplify the work that you're doing. And
Yeah.
so an example of this that I have is like currently we have this website for Bond and it's being revamped, but it worked because I made it when we first started and I left it there with our programs, right? But we have a lot of what folks will call earned media. So the news will come out and see what we're doing. We may have an article written about us. And the more that you, one, learn how to own your narrative as a business owner, as philanthropy as well, as a nonprofit operator, you have the ability to tell the story that needs to be told in the correct way. Like we are past the time where we allow folks to tell our own stories. We should be telling our stories for ourselves. And so doing that through a lot of earned media, we got the attention of BBC.
Yeah.
BBC World Program reached out via email without us reaching out to them and said, hey, we see the work that you're doing and we would love to do a spot on Black single mothers and daughters in Baltimore City. That's because of doing the work well. And so when you do the work well and you take the time to understand the art of storytelling, which I believe our people created,
Listen.
and use it as a tool to, like you said, slash these negative narratives that are out there, more and more platforms will want you to do that with them.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to utilize that as an opportunity to continue to tell the narrative correctly. So instead of having these negative narratives about the welfare queen and how single Black mothers aren't working and how they are taking advantage of the system or all of them are in poverty, we get to tell our actual stories. So a Bond mom and daughter will be on there. My mom will be on there, and I will be able to host a segment with BBC. That doesn't happen unless you do the work and you learn how to tell your story well.
That's right.
Those are like two big things that I can think of.
That's right. Yeah, I'm still so excited about that opportunity and I can't wait for that spot. Anyone else want to answer that question? As you're thinking, I just want to remind the audience, please, if you have questions, drop them in the chat box. We'll be moving on to questions and answers shortly. But just wanted to make sure that you're slipping your questions into that box. Deanna, you want to answer that question before we?
Yeah, because I think Atir is reminding me that this year we really had to ramp up our advocacy work, right? We've been advocates for a long time. Like we didn't realize that's what we were doing, but we're abolitionists, right? So we believe that we should never have, there's a world as possible without incarceration. And that's a hard line we hold. We won't participate in the building of those. And we have huge advocates for building alternatives. And that is just where we stand. And it has finally this year, and we've seen the impact of that over 10 years of me running my mouth about it. The first national representation of first architecture professional organization has finally said we should not be participating in the designing of prisons and jails, but need to be looking at alternatives like restorative justice centers. So they're even using our language finally, right? So it's moving into the public lexicon, and we're seeing it in RFPs in LA County and people coming out of Texas. And so it's been interesting to see that the storytelling that Atir is talking about and consistency, it's like, we don't build prisons and jails. We don't, and people gave me so much shit for so long. And now, welcome to the party. It's like, it's happening, right? So staying the course, keeping the narrative strong, standing your ground with your beliefs has really worked out around the social impact piece and social innovation piece with this work, and other people are joining it. We can't do it by ourselves, so
Right.
we all need to participate.
Amazing work. Amazing work. Um, awesome. Alan, you want to say anything on that?
I was gonna say, I just want to jump in really quickly so we can keep moving. I love these questions, so I don't want to get stuck on this one for too long. I was just gonna say one of the things as that I think is a really important part of being a social innovator and just like changing system is the way that we hire as well. For one, like, are we hiring from our community? Are we hiring? A lot of times I think that we are hiring based on what we've seen, traditional white middle class norms of this is hiring. This is what you're supposed to do. And recently during our hiring process, like we kind of just came up with some different roles, but then as we started hiring people or interviewing people, we're like, wait, there's an opportunity here for us to create something that fits this person. And I think that that is social innovation, is to be, I mean, social innovation is problem solving. And so if we are finding the right people who maybe don't fit a job that we thought that we needed, but we can create something for that person to bring them into the fold because that's the person that we want, I will create a job for you because that's what social innovation is. I have yet to ask for a background check because I don't care what's in your background. I care more about what's in your front ground. Like, what are you going to do in the future?
Right.
I know that people have made mistakes. I've made mistakes. Thankfully, anybody asked me for a background check to be, a founder of this organization. But, I think that it's really important that if we are going to change the way that people move and the way that people operate, we have to change the way that we hire. We have to change the way that we bring people in, whether it's as contractors, as however, and we have to start paying people. So like interns, pay your interns. That was something that we've had challenges with in the past where we were like, I don't know, we're struggling right now, but the intern is struggling too. So we have to figure out a way to we have to like kind of have these flags in our community. Like, this is the flag that we're going to put in the ground, that we're going to hire from our community. We're going to pay you. We're going to pay you well. We had to tap into like some studies of other nonprofits that kind of give us median, salaries for different roles so that we could get a better context. I don't ask what people made at their last job because they probably weren't paying you what they should have been paying either. So I don't want to base your salary on the fact that someone else didn't pay you well. We pay all of the women on our staff are paid equally, some better, because I'm paying you based on what you bring to the organization. And so I think that for me, as a man who started a company with two other men and serves 75% of our participants are Black women, 75% of our staff is Black women. Like, I have to be the one that is stepping up to make change in the things that I want to see different, so that my daughters that are now 14 and 16, I want to set these things in motion, and I have those conversations with them, and hopefully when they are starting to enter, the field for their career or starting their own business, this is not something that we still have to be talking about.
Yeah, Alan, so good. Two things that you said, pay your interns. Yes. We actually are supporting a fellow who has an organization called Pay Our Interns. And then also pay Black women, please. What they're worth, please pay Black women. I mean, we can't say it enough. And I'm so encouraged to know that you are leading the way and taking that charge. We are about to wrap up these questions. I could literally sit here and talk to you all night. But I know we've got another really exciting conversation after us, but I cannot end without talking about this, which is something so essential to our community and to ourselves, which is ensuring our well-being. Everyone who knows me knows that this quote is my favorite, of Audre Lorde. She says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And so I want to know, we all want to know, how can social innovators tackle oppressive systems while sustaining themselves in their work? If there are self-care or well-being practices that you have found helpful throughout your work, if you can share those with us.
While you were asking this question, I was just rattling off all the things I do. But the first thing I would say is find your center. Everyone's center is different. Every person has a different way of tapping into their authentic selves and their most healthy selves, right? So for me, I get up around 7. From 7 to about 10 o'clock, I'm not talking to anyone. I have my quiet time. I meditate, I pray, I will go exercise, because these are the things that feed me. These are the things that make me a better person to show up to work with Bond, to work with my staff. I'm better that way. The other thing that I would say is that I really believe in therapy. Um, I'm an advocate for it. Thank you all so much for the chaplains, because that's how I tapped into knowing, like, hey, yes, therapy. So I have a therapist, and I have a therapist because there are things that I will want to process and talk about and think about with all the stuff coming at us in the world. And I have a space to do that with someone who is completely objective, you know, and that's necessary, especially for social innovators and social entrepreneurs. And then the last thing I would say is just circle. My inner circle feeds me. And I get so much joy from them. Like I almost had tears in my eyes thinking about them, you know, and to know that that is my grounding, you know, that is my space of peace. And I protect it, and I love them for loving me through all the phases that I've gone through and being a social innovator. So you have to be able to identify that space. And I'll say one last thing, Cheryl Dorsey. I went out to lunch with her. I know you're on here. Hi, Cheryl. I went out to lunch with her earlier this year, I think it was. Yeah. And this was right before COVID took off. And she had just come back from sabbatical and told me, yeah, it was March. She told me a really big piece of advice that I'm about to adhere to, which was take a break. She hadn't taken a vacation in, I think it was 10 years or something.
Mhm.
And it was too long. She said it was too long. Don't do that. Take a break. And so I'm actually about to take my first vacation for myself next week, which I have never done before. So those are just those little juicy nuggets I would leave you all with.
That's awesome. Deanna.
I'm going to double down on a tears therapy thing. It's essential. I work with a somatic experiencing therapist. So if you don't, somatic work is very, very helpful. So we're using the body. This is breaking outside of Western normative therapeutic modalities. So I couldn't live without it. I have an executive coach, essential now, that I asked my funder to pay for. Like, I am paying for that. You need to pay for that. Where's my executive coach? And I do dyads. It's a modality I use, or co-counseling, if you all have heard of those. So I'm doing that every week. I can't do it without those things. I mean, other things, prayer, meditation, breaks, all of that. But I think without this sort of constellation of physical and emotional support from third party, whether they be friends or professionals, has been really, really critical for me.
Awesome. Alan.
Yeah, I feel like mad convicted right now because I'm not doing none of the stuff that they said. So it is definitely a reminder. I do need to call my therapist back and be like, look, all right, we need to get back to it. But the one thing that I will say is to find a thing. For me, that thing is photography. I have been a photographer since I was 12. I met Gordon Parks when I was a kid, and it changed my life. And so sometimes for me, the self-care is to walk and take photos, of whatever it is. Sometimes it's street photography, sometimes it's, just taking pictures of cars and whatever else that I see in my environment. And I think that it's really important to find something that you can express, that allows you to express yourself and allows you to kind of release and allows you the time to just kind of take in everything around you and then kind of process it in a way. And so for me, that is photography. It gives me that time to just be, by myself, and what, as long as it's not like storming, I can be out, so I'm getting some exercise. I'm also, exercising my creative muscles as well. And so that has been one thing for me that has been really beneficial. And I do need to make more time. So like I said, I feel super convicted right now, because I've been taking days off, and on my days off, I just use those days to do the work that I couldn't do during the week.
Yeah.
Because I know that people won't mess with me on those days, and I gotta do something else. So I don't know, I might have to put my laptop stashed in some combination locker that I don't have a combo to or something. I don't know. Like I need to figure something out because I gotta do better.
Yeah. But you know what? Sometimes it's just about acknowledging that. And that's why we stay in community, right? To help us remind ourselves of what's important and what we need to do for ourselves. And Alan, I mean, you're such a dope shooter. We're supposed to shoot in LA. We got to shoot the next time we're in the same city.
Yeah.
But for sure. Thank you so much for sharing, all of you. This conversation has been incredible. Again, I could be here all night. I know we have some questions from the audience, so I'm going to go ahead and ask one of the questions now. This question is from Maureen. I hope that I'm saying your name correctly. This is around collaborations between the Black community and also African entrepreneurs. And the question is, are there any ideas on mutually beneficial ventures that promote growth of the Black community? Any ideas of like how to bridge this community together?
I don't have anything specifically as far as like an exact idea, but I think that I'm always the entrepreneur who's looking for collaborators on things, you know. So once I figure out the thing that I'm really, really good at, I need to also find the thing that someone else is really good at and see how we can merge those things together. And so I think that in the African American community and in the African community, there has to be um, individuals who are working on, you know, things that can be collaborative. I'm not sure. I mean, it would definitely depend from community to community, you know, on what those specific things are. Because I'm not sure if there's like a broad brush to say that, you know, it should be this one thing, you know. So I would just say, just in general, find people in your city or in your region that are doing something that can be a great add-on to the thing that you're doing, where you have this mutual benefit, and try to make that work. That would be my first thought on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan.
I just think there's so much work that needs to be done between relationships between the Black community and the full diaspora. So when I think about that, I really do think about spaces for conversation and connection,
Yeah.
as like a first step to understand what it is we actually should be collaborating on and partnering around first. The other thing that came to mind immediately was just economics, right?
Right.
That green dollar has affected all of us.
Correct.
We can all understand how it has impacted our ancestry and our future. And so thinking about how we collaborate thoughtfully and intentionally around money
Mhm.
and economics, more so economics than money. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Deanna, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, the thing that came to mind was what Atira said, some real honest dialogue, some hard conversations, you know, I think would be really helpful, meaning that, you know, maybe honest conversations is what I would say, would be a great way to start.
Yep. I agree. I mean, I think all of what you offered was super helpful. And just recognizing, right, like Atira, like you were saying, there are inequities and challenges and barriers that are faced right across cultures. We support fellows in 86 countries, right? And we know that there are similar challenges for folks, on the continent of Africa, in any of the regions that you select, right? Like there are challenges. And so then how can we think about what that looks like to understand what those challenges are and how we can better support each other in navigating through them, no matter what cultural context we're in, right? We have a question from Samantha, and she's asking Deanna, can you expand on what you meant by place matters and how can funders do a better job in prioritizing this?
Yeah, so we often talk a lot about the environment and looking around you and look at your typical day, right? You have a home you live in, you get in your car and you might drive on the road or you get on public transport. You have an office you go to, your children may go to a school, you've been in a hospital, right? The built environment is all around you and you're in it all the time, right? You probably spend more time in architecture than you do outside in nature, probably. You're breathing the air coming through those systems. You can have sick buildings, you can have healthy buildings. We build what we believe, right? So we build the values and the beliefs of a society manifest in bricks and mortar, to use Alan's company, which I love the name of that, because it's rendered in bricks and mortar. If you are racist, if racism is underlying, you will build that stuff. So you better be careful about what you build, because it'll get you. It'll get you. Suburbia was made up by white people as a way to escape from Black people. And look at the landscape of this country is urban sprawl, suburbia with freeways that cut our communities in half. So let me tell you, that's what place will do to you. Yeah. So if we're not thinking about it, and if we're not having agency in it, it's very hard to change and thrive. Like we tried, we got attacked by the built environment and its associated policies. Philanthropy can begin to support the building of totally new spaces. We have so many spaces that we need so many spaces we don't have right now. We have nowhere for young people to go. Forget it, we have nowhere for them to go. We have no place for elders, for affinity groups. We don't have a place you can go hang out and not have to pay money, right? You have to go to a bar or whatever. So the amount of spaces and places that we haven't even imagined yet that we need to make are immense, and philanthropy needs to support the building of infrastructure that's equitable, both in who owns it, what it looks like, it's culturally relevant. You know, there's a lot, we have to rebuild this country physically, and philanthropy has the capital to do it because it's not cheap. They need to pay for it, basically. At least put the deposit down and don't ask for it back. Right? Just give it to me.
Just give it. That's right.
Reparations. I'm screaming reparations.
I love it. No, that's a real thing because there are other folks who are not being asked for the money back, and they're not Black and brown folks. Right?
But white people have the money. They have the money.
Right. Correct.
They have it, and they own everything. Correct. And they'll take they took what you had. So it's really serious. I'm really serious about the real estate, the ownership, the building, and philanthropy's role and a capacity to actually help build this stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Deanna, for that answer to that question. Awesome. So we have another question from Demetrius. We've been through it in 2020. It brought us a recession, pandemic, a historic election. But one thing is certain, Black people still find joy, create, and move culture. What do you anticipate how your position will be in a year from now? And I guess I don't want to speak for Demetrius, but maybe he's talking about yourself and maybe your organization.
For me and Mortar, I think that this is a time where we're probably being more creative and more innovative than we ever have been. And we pride ourselves in being an organization that is always trying to think of like what's next. But I think that going through 2020 has encouraged us to think about what are some other barriers, what are some things that we hadn't thought about before that we could think about differently. So for example, for our participants, our program is designed to be face-to-face, 15 people in a room. It's a cohort model, and that has shifted significantly. And it also has had us start to think about how we do distribution of our curriculum as well. So it's, a culturally competent curriculum that we wrote 3 years ago because we couldn't find one that matched what we needed and spoke in the tone that we needed to speak in for Black and Brown communities. And so we wrote our own. And so this is actually given us an opportunity to think about, all right, do we need to be doing digital distribution? Like, how can we get this to more communities? And, you know, I want to eventually get it to the point where it's in the hands of every person in America who says that they want to start a business and they are investing in, you know, creating equitable economic ecosystems in their community. Like, we want to create like a toolkit. Like, how do I create an ecosystem that is equitable for entrepreneurs who want to start, you know? And, you know, this climate has started to make me start thinking in a different way about what we're doing, about the perceptions, and how people are receiving and how we're distributing that content as well. So I would say between now and next year, this time next year, we should have something out, you know, that we're beta testing, at least a digital distribution of our current curriculum, you know, and we'll continue to make adjustments to it, because ultimately we know that when, you know, Cincinnati had all of the systems built, we weren't the only city, you know, that had these same exact challenges, you know. So we know that there are Black and Brown communities all throughout America, in every single state, every city, that has the same exact challenges that we are having, and that we've had kind of built this formula for. And so for us, it's figuring out, how do we bottle the formula so that we can start to share it with other communities.
I love that. Thank you, Alan.
I think we are in the same vein, Alan. Our brains are twins in this moment for our organizations. Bond had to shift as well. And so our model was based in school sites. And we would go meet moms and daughters after school, provide dinner, have our restorative circle practice and our STEM programming. And that is how we met. And then, you know, COVID happened and we had to switch to virtual. So how do you hold a restorative circle in a virtual space and still create that feeling? You know, how do you ensure that moms and daughters are eating, that they have access to the digital things that they need? Sorry about that, Norma. That they have access to, you know, the digital space and computers, that they have access to the materials we would normally bring to them. And so we had to think about, how do we box up Bond? And we created a Bond box. And so next year, by this time next year, we're expecting Bond box to at least be spread across multiple states, at least 5 or 6 other states, and have virtual hubs in those states. Because we have to think about the fact that just because we have a vaccine that is coming out, it does not necessarily mean the rollout will be great. It does not necessarily mean we'll be able to immediately go back to having in-person meetings and sessions. You have to plan for that. And it's also a great way to ensure people who may not normally be able to access you and get that type of support. So for us, for Bond, who's outside of Baltimore City, can now get it. And so like, that's one of the biggest things that we're working on. And then the other piece is curriculum. And it's not our Bond curriculum because that's specific to membership, but it is the Money Bond curriculum, which is our financial wellness curriculum we created. And our first-year moms, our second-year moms are going through it now. And so we'll have the opportunity to do an iteration of it and support institutions who want to work with single Black moms and daughters and help them be economically mobile, teach that. And so we're working on what that model looks like at this time, but it's an ever evolving institution. And I think as a social innovator, you're always evolving, you're always creating, you're always thinking about how to do what is next and how to be ahead of the curve.
Yes, yes. And Deanna, take us home.
Well, since we do creative work, right, we're designing with people and making things, we definitely had to both pivot on the technology and using new softwares, new hardwares, Apple tablets, pencils, using virtual whiteboards. And at the same time, we think Unbuilding Racism is essential work. So we did travel and we did show up in person, and architecture is place-based. So you got to kind of be there and to see it. And we were safe, right? So, and the designers on deck, our local folks help with that. And it's hard to decouple I'll call it the racial awakening in this country with COVID together. We found ourselves having to amplify the work so that the COVID piece just couldn't be a barrier. Like, we've got to keep going and we can't stop. We have to look at the fierce urgency of now and the long-term future at the same time. So my organization has doubled during COVID, and will continue, and the work is more complex and more larger than ever. And in a year, we will own our own real estate in Detroit and be developing our own projects with the community. We will have new tools and prototypes out that we hope to be developing with folks. And so it'll be an exciting year. We're going to be a hybrid company tax structure, which I learned from Echoing Green about all this stuff. We're doing it. We're finally doing it. So in a year, watch out. We will be DJDS Real Estate Holdings.
Yes, yes. Wow. To say that this conversation has been informative, inspirational, transformational, just would not be doing it full justice. I don't know that I have a word right now in this moment, but I will just want to express my gratitude, my deep, deep gratitude for the privilege of being in community with you all. I love this work. I love this work. And it is folks like you who keep me so excited about the future, particularly for Black and Brown folks. And it's what an amazing task you all are taking on, a feat, a purpose to do this work. And so thank you so much for allowing us to be in conversation tonight. I want to thank you for your time, your vulnerability, and just the work that you do for communities all over this country. And I want to thank our audience for engaging with us so awesomely during this time. We're not done. We got another one coming. So I just want to say thank you to our panelists. Let's show them some love if you can in the chat. Thank you so much. And now as we transition.
Hold on, before you transition, Rachel D, we got to give you some love because
Alan,
you came with us, so we got to give you some special thanks as well. I appreciate you and the entire organization for giving us all this opportunity. You did a great job.
Thank you so much, Alan. Appreciate you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Atira. Thank you, Deanna. Thank you, Alan. And so now we are getting ready to jump into our next conversation. We are just warming up. And I'd love and be honored to bring on my colleague and friend, Tiffany Thompson. She is our Senior Director of Global Partnerships and Equity here at Echoing Green. TT Tiff, what's going on, sis? You look fabulous. I love the lip. We're ready to go.
Listen, it's been a COVID year in the house, and to get me to put on some lipstick was like, oh, a treat. I get to do something. But also, let me just say, and piggyback off of Alan's words, that was an incredible, poignant, honest conversation. So salute to you, Rachel D, for your brilliance and your charm and your wit and your wonderful questions. And another round of kudos to the fellows who joined us, who, as you said, continue to inspire me every day to get up and do this work. So go get you a drink. Well, COVID safe in your home or something. But yes, there you go. Cheers to you, my friend.
Wow. Okay,
yeah, exactly. Cheers. How you doing, guys? I am so excited for this next conversation. This person needs no introduction, but I am absolutely going to do that for her tonight. For the past decade, Jamira, who is a friend, has worked with corporations, nonprofits, and government leaders on better engaging impacted communities. Currently, she is head of youth engagement and skills for the Global Business Coalition for Education. There, she helps to ensure a collaborative relationship between youth, bilateral agencies, governments, and business leaders to enable innovative ways to educate, engage, and activate young people around the world. In 2018, she was the first United States citizen awarded the Global Leadership Award for Vital Voices and selected as an MIT Media Lab Fellow. Before that, She worked as the National Deputy Millennial Vote Director at Hillary for America. And then before that, she managed the gun violence and criminal justice portfolio at Amnesty International. Her work sits at the intersection of policy, community, and social good. She provides unique insight that will help actualize the change we so desperately need. I want to be able to give you a little context into why this conversation is important for me. While all of those accolades are true, Jamira for me is a friend. And not like a friend, like she's like the friend that you call on a daily basis, that you joke with, that you cackle with. And it was the first and only time I'm gonna say this in public, Jamira. She is one of my closest friends. She is Philly's finest. She is a youth engagement whisperer. She is a doggy mom. But most importantly, she is a dedicated and brilliant leader. She cares deeply about creating spaces for Black youth and then simply getting out the way for them to lead. So please, everyone, welcome Jamira to the stage, to the room, to the conversation. You crying? What's going on over there?
I'm crying because this is the nicest you have ever, thank you, have ever said to me. I need to, Echo and Green, can I please get this recorded and put away for later? So I can play it every time she insults me. But to be honest, I may not be a puppy mom after tonight if my dog doesn't sit down somewhere, but I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for coming. I mean, we've known each other for over 10 years. We met at Temple University, so all of the Temple folks that are in the chat, we welcome you to put an owl, a TU, whatever that is in there. This conversation prior to this was rooted around social impact at the intersection of social innovation and social entrepreneurship. But this conversation is going to be a bit more about communal engagement in this work. How do everyday people get involved? What was your entry point into this work, and why designing futures for us, by us, is critically important for this moment? This is going to be, you know, we called it a fireside chat, but this is an intimate conversation with a friend, you know, a convo over drinks, over coffee. So this is a convo with a homegirl every day. So I invite you all to pour your glass of wine, to sit back and to enjoy the ride. Is that water? Yeah, I got water too.
It's water, yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
It's an early night, we'll see.
All right, so you ready?
I am.
All right, so it's critically important that when supporting one's ideas, it's important that we also understand the lives and the context and their story, you know, their personal story. At Echo and Green, we often call it a moment of obligation. For some, it's a moment. Others, it's simply their life experience. For some, it's names we know: Trayvon, Michael, Sandra, George, Brianna. For you, it was Andre. Who is Andre? And why is it important to understand who Andre is in relation to who Jamira is and why you do this work?
Wow, that's the most eloquent way that I've been asked that question. And it's interesting because a lot of the past panelists actually alluded to this, right? Is that oftentimes Black folks create solutions of things that they've seen, things that they've been impacted by, and their real realities. And that's very much my own reality. I grew up in West Philadelphia. I am born and raised. My claim to fame is actually not anything that I've done, but the fact that I went to the same high school as Will Smith. And if y'all know him, let him know. But I grew up in a community that oftentimes grapple with the reality of hopelessness, right? We were surrounded by gun violence, criminal justice, or I should say mass incarceration. And I grew up in the height of the war on drugs and the crack epidemic that ran rampant throughout my city. And Andre was my 20-year-old brother who very much had the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was blessed to have, 13 younger siblings who he felt an obligation to help provide for. And so like many of my siblings, they found their way into selling drugs, selling weed, selling crack as a way to kind of provide economic support to my family. And in 2005, which I think was a very pivotal moment for me as a 15-year-old growing up in Philadelphia, it was the year that Andre was shot and killed by a friend who he had taken into his home. But it was also the year that my father was convicted of murder. And so I lived at a weird juxtaposition of knowing both a victim and a perpetrator. And it made me realize that the issues impacting our communities are so much more nuances and complex than just who is the victim and who is the perpetrator, but really what about our society cultivated those communities to exist in the first place?
Thank you for sharing that with us and trusting us with that important story. You know, what you said resonates so much with me, because what you're talking about is like, you have firsthand experience around why us, and that journey of your life walks with you every day as you do this work. It's important to center that, right? Because you and your lived experience are important for the design for what Black futures looks like. What does that Black agenda look like? A liberatory one, right? So let's switch a little bit into the design piece of this conversation, right? Data tells us that Black folks are issue-based voters, but we know Black folks aren't monolithic. So when it comes to designing liberatory systems for us and by us, I'm going to ask you a multi-layered question. What does liberation mean to you? Who should we empower to design the liberatory systems and Black agenda? And how do we as Black folks get organized around a Black agenda?
Okay, with the heated questions on this Tuesday night. Well, I'll start with the first one. You know, I actually was just having a conversation about this earlier. The idea that oftentimes Black liberation, or even oftentimes how we envision the world to be, is rooted in white supremacy, is rooted in patriarchy, is rooted in a world in which was never designed for us or by us. And so the way I view liberation, particularly Black liberation, is the understanding that I am because you are. There's no way that I could ever identify myself as successful or wealthy unless my entire community is successful and wealthy, until my family is no longer living in West Philadelphia, right? Or that no longer West Philadelphia exists as it currently stands, where, you know, people don't have enough money to support their families and keep the lights on. And so when I think about who needs to be a part of that conversation, it always reminds me that we need to center those who are the most impacted at the center of change, meaning not just for collaboration purposes where we ask them to share their story on a stage so that we can monetize it, but really that we ask them to be a part of the ideation, the implementation, the evaluation, and whatever output then comes to fruition based on the continuous support of those in the community. Because I find that, you know, oftentimes the things that we create in our community to ensure that our lives are not just impactful or matter, but that we are able to prosper, have oftentimes been taken from us and monetized by those who don't look like us, right? When we think about Uber, Black folks was doing taxi cab services in the hood long before Uber came about, right? When we think about food services like Postmates, we were already doing those things. Mom and pop shops, mom and pop's homes was making platters for people on the block in order to get income. And so it's interesting how we never are oftentimes able to benefit from the fruit of our labor or even the fruit of our innovation. And I think that's why it's so important that we have to remind ourselves, even as we as Black innovators, as advocates, as we get further and further closest to traditional institutions of power, how are we reminding ourselves to look back and go back and remember the stories and the communities that we come from, and making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable as well as the communities that we're trying to infiltrate.
So then how do we get Black folks organized around what a Black agenda looks like, right? You know, Black Futures has a 2020 Black agenda. It's brilliant, it's comprehensive. But how do we get organized around that?
First of all, ironically enough, I think to some extent Black folks are organized around it. I think Black folks understand, especially now, I think we're in a very unique moment within our history where there is a common denominator, at least for the vast majority of us, that realize that there's no way that I can be free unless we're all free.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that by the things that are being innovated. You also see that by the fact that, you know, this past election, there was a lot of Black folks, a lot of extreme progressive folks who did not want to vote for Joe Biden. That was not their first choice, but they did it with an understanding that he was a means to an end, or he was a means to a pathway that will enable for Black folks to some level stay alive, even if we don't get everything that we want. So I do think that not only are we now looking at the solutions that need to be created for all of us, but also a clear understanding that we have to be strategic about it. And we may not get everything that we want, but how are we working along the way with different collaborators and accomplices to be able to ask for more, demand more, and to get folks to cut the check when we need it in order for us to make the proper investments in our community. So I do think the work is happening. I don't think we're elevating it in a way in which Black folks can see that there's something to participate in, as well as to celebrate and uplift.
So you mentioned Joe Biden and the election, and I want to shift a little bit to Black women. And I know you've been on a rampage today talking about Black women. As we continue to partner with Spelman, it's super important for us to talk about the role of Black women and the role to freedom and Black liberation. I mean, I believe you can't tell the story of Black liberation and freedom without even knowing what Black women have and had to say about that. Latasha Brown recently said, "People have reduced Black women to our participation, but this is really about power." Talk to us about the role of Black women historically and today in designing the Black agenda, and why today we should always take up space.
I have been on a rampage because people tried me this morning. And I had to remind them. It's so interesting because when we look at every major moment in our history, particularly the history of this country, Black women have always been at the forefront of change. We may not have always had the microphone. We may not always get the shine. We may not always be written in history books. Oftentimes we're relegated to that woman who sat on the bus and refused to get up, right? Which is BS. And so I think it's really important that as we both look at the path forward, we have to ensure that those who have always been a part of the collective impact, which are Black women, that's why when you invest in a Black woman, it's not just her, it's her entire community, because she is more likely to then go back to that community, reinvest in her family and her streets, her community, et cetera. And so I think it's really important that if we think about Black futures, we also have to center that work, and particularly the experiences of Black women. It would be easy for me to say that Black liberation is just about just all skin folk. But we also have to recognize the real harm that is done to Black women every single day. Men oftentimes benefit from patriarchy. And until they're willing to acknowledge the real harm that they've done, there's no way we can we can see a path forward where we're not just talking about Black futures, but we're talking about Black families, we're talking about Black communities, we're talking about Black businesses, we're talking about building generational wealth that enables for our communities to continue to invest in ourselves. If folks are thinking that Black women are somehow getting these jobs because we're cute and we got nice hair and we're trending, that is false. We're oftentimes overqualified. We're in high demand because we're able to get shit done. And I think that we should be celebrating that and not looking for ways to create division amongst our communities.
People in the chat are throwing the towel, saying "preach."
Oh, yes.
You talked a little bit about, we're talking a little bit about voting. And, as Black folks, that is often seen as a tool for liberation. And every election cycle, the world is reminded of the Black voting bloc, right? Someone once said, Black folks in particular are like drunk on politics. But we know that voting is only one tool for liberation, because if it was the only tool, we would have already been free. Mm-hmm. So we see that as one part. Talk to us about why voting is simply one tool, but what, in addition to voting, are the tools and the sectors that are absolutely needed to ensure that we all are free?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yes, voting is just a tool within our toolbox. Well, if we are really looking to cultivate and create Black liberation, it requires us to use every single tool at every single moment when we're able to, because it's easy for us to say, dismantle this, burn down this, but those things are going to happen overnight. And we also want to be a part of the conversation for what we replace those systems and institutions with. Right. So it requires us to not just vote, but also run for office. It also requires us to work in these offices and raise money for these individuals. And also it requires us to do the work in our communities, right? So we can create our own community organizations that provides direct services for organizations. We can go to our bosses and get them to make, prime example, I work for a very white, liberal, international agency that cares about little Black kids in Africa. But we oftentimes don't ensure that they're making those investments in a way that is impactful and just beyond check. So I think, there are a number of things that we can do. We can also do direct legislation, which is getting ballot initiatives on the ballot that actually improves the conditions of our communities. Everything from police oversight commissions, everything from youth commissions, everything from legislations that enables for elected officials to get removed from office when they're not doing their job. So there are a number of things that we can do to constantly be engaged. But I also would say that our role first has to be to have the hard conversations with ourselves and also our community. It's easy for us to be the most progressive person in our family, but if our family is perpetuating many of the same white supremacy ideologies or perpetuating many of the xenophobic and homophobic ideologies, we're going to continue to see so much division within not just marginalized communities, but also people of color, Black communities. And so as far as I'm concerned, we need to throw everything at the wall. But more importantly, I think we need to recognize that there's no sleeping for Black folks. Our very existence is political. And so we have to ensure that we're a part of every single conversation and not see elected officials as our savior, but as our accomplice in getting the legislation we need in order to get free.
Whew. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about is like accessing power in multiple spaces, right? Yeah. Like we can't just be relying on the power of you to be at your organization or the power of someone else at a tech organization, right? It's about us accessing power, but also like reminding ourselves is why we got there. Dr. King, oh, you got something to say? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, that also reminds me, oftentimes Black folks get excited about being the only person in the room. You are actually doing more harm than good, right? If you don't have anyone there who's gonna back you up, support you, your position within that organization or in that agency isn't worth it. So like, how are you bringing folks along to ensure you're not the only one, but that you're the first one to continue to open the door and pull up the window as folks are trying to climb in and be a part of the process?
Okay, so I don't know, you didn't see my questions, but that like ties so seamlessly into my next question because—
Yeah, read minds, Tiffany.
Because we're friends. See, you like that? I want to talk to us a little bit about power, right? And like what it means for Black folks to access power and what that means in terms of like what you potentially have to give up, what do you access when you get that power? So Dr. King said power is the ability to achieve a purpose. Yeah. Whether or not it is good or bad depends upon the purpose. And we see power in work in a direct and obvious way. Sometimes it operates in less obvious ways, sometimes hidden in cultural norms. It perpetuates existing power structures. When Black folks, gain power, it might be one of controversy and a moment of choice. On one spectrum, we have the desire and potential need to access power that ultimately pushes us further away from those we serve, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we as Black folks obtain and maintain power in predominantly white spaces while also keeping power in Black spaces? Is that possible?
So that's so hard. Because
I got another one once you get to that one.
It's so hard. And I say that because, what I find Black folks who oftentimes have power, they're hoarding it. And I think that is a clear symptom of white supremacy. White people have taught us that when we get something, that it's all individualistic, right? It's all about us and our individual success. At the same time, I find that, it's no coincidence that when you're the only person in the room, it is deliberate, it is by design. And it's no coincidence that when they hire Black women to lead diversity and inclusion trainings, to lead community engagement and social impact strategies, that they have no support staff and they have very little budget, right? They're oftentimes expecting us to make miracles out of crumbs that they have thrown at us to make it appear as if we got power. Mm-hmm. And so I think what I would be curious about is, are we talking about the appearance of power or actual power? Right? We can have folks in positions of power, but they don't have any real power to make anything happen. Prime example, Barack Obama's second term, right? He didn't have the support of a Senate and a House. So anything he actually wanted to get passed had to be done bipartisan, or it had to be done through executive something. It had to be done. Executive order. Or we see these folks in very high positions and they don't have power. And so I would say the key that I find is that the power within the Black community is centered around like our collective power with each other, right? How are we organized? How are we bringing folks out? How are we capitalizing off our own identity or monetizing our own talents without allowing someone to come in and do it? And then how are we utilizing our direct experience as a way to influence positions and spaces that have oftentimes not have been created for us? So I do think that there is a way to hone that power for good, and to hone that power and keep the power separate from the Black community and traditional white spaces. The question I would pose is, you know, is that helpful though? Is that helpful keeping those things separate? Is that helpful even infiltrating white spaces, asking for legitimacy of our work? Or does it actually do more harm than good, right? I turned down a job maybe 2 years ago. It's a very lucrative job.
We could have been rich.
Huh?
Could have been rich.
Could have been rich, you know, could have had some money to, you know, make it rain. But the organization that I would have worked for would have gained more from my participation at that organization than I would have ever been able to do as an output of that organization, right? A lot of times we are in spaces that people capitalize on our face, on our image, on our background. A woman described me yesterday, basically saying, oh yeah, Jameer, brother was killed. And I was just like, that is not your story to tell.
And you're more than just that.
Yeah, so I question every day about, like, what does power really look like in spaces and places that are traditionally not meant for you and are not meant to save or fight for your communities. Yeah, right. It's a hard question to really think through.
Whew. I know we are at the 10-minute mark, so I think I have time.
So fast.
I know, we should just do this more often. And then you could say something nice about me.
Yeah.
No, okay, we'll move on.
We'll move on. I have nothing to say about you. Yeah, I just gotta think about it.
Okay. I got 2 more questions for you, and then I'm gonna open it up for folks in this room on the Zoom chat for questions. Jamira is here. I want to hear all your questions that you have for her. So drop them in the chat box when something comes to you. I know, Melanie, 10 minutes. I know, I'm sorry. I mean, maybe Jameer and I could take it to Instagram. We could do a part 2 or something. All right, so let me ask you my final 2 questions, right? You said to us something really important about when you get invited to spaces, who are you bringing along? Mm-hmm. Who do you encourage others to bring along with them? And who do you bring along when you go into those rooms?
Oh, I always ask for a +1. I need a co-signer. You know, I need a partner in crime. So I'm oftentimes asking for other young people to accompany me. I'm oftentimes asking for another woman of color to accompany me, depending on the space, especially if, you know, there's a lot of spaces that have, again, that are white spaces, but that have enabled for Black women to be a part of. And so if it's a space that I feel like already has enough Black women representation, I'll ask for a Black man to be included or someone from the LGBTQ. So it varies, but I'm always thinking about who can I bring along, or if I don't want to participate in something, how can I pass that opportunity on to someone else? Because again, there is not a scarcity of opportunities. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what they want you to believe, there is not a scarcity of opportunities or money. We are just been told to compete for the 10% versus demanding more from the top. That being said, I think, you know, for folks who are trying to figure out who they should bring along is, you know, take a clear view of the space, right? If you are going into a tech space, we know there's not a lot of people of color. We know there's not a lot of women and girls. Bring someone along. And so I would say evaluate the spaces and places that you're entering and try to bring someone who either looks like you or who doesn't look like you, especially if you're an ally who doesn't look like you, Mr. Ally, Mrs. Ally, into those spaces and share that invitation because, you know, power demands access demands power. Mm-hmm. And it really requires all of us to think about, you know, not only how we gain power for our own individual goals, but how we share that with folks who are normally not a part of conversations that are about them or that has the potential to impact their lives.
So I'm gonna leave you with this question, and it's rooted in like celebration and joy. You know, mm-hmm. We often can have conversations about Black folks and it can be just sad and depressing, and ain't nobody want to do that. Like, we are joyful people rooted in the church. We are song singing people. We are hand clapping people. We are dancing people. So there is a conversation around Black folks that is filled with joy and inspiration and hope and praise and thankfulness and gratefulness, despite all that this country gives us, despite what 2020 has shown us, right? So I want to ask you this. activism begins with a very important question. Why not me? Why not you? Or why not all of us? It's this notion that power to the people, which really for you means serving as the youngest leader to serve as the executive director of the Philadelphia Youth Commission, or Alan serving as the co-founder of Mortar, or Tira serving as the founder of Bond, and Deanna serving as the co-founder of Designing Justice, Designing Spaces. Everyone needs to be celebrated in this journey that we've been on from 1619 to now, right? It's been a long, tiring, impactful year, but it's important that we celebrate ourselves in this moment. Who do you want us to celebrate today as we continue this road to justice and freedom?
Well, you can celebrate my puppy, Mickey. No, I'm joking. He went to bed from his pee pad. No. That's a really great question. You know, I would actually say 2020 has been absolutely exhausting. And I would also say that, you know, couple that with being in the house for months at a time, where many folks are not sure where their next meal is going to come from, or not sure if they're going to have their job at the first of the year. I really think it's important that as we find ourselves strolling through Instagram, TikTok, that we don't feel the need to create comparisons of ourselves, right? Our journey is our own individual journey. And with that being said, I think it's really important, especially as Black folks, as folks who, you know, the ability to walk out of the house every day, the ability to get up out your bed every day is an act of revolution. Is helping us to enable for us to show the rest of the world that not only do we matter, but that we have something to contribute. So I would say we should celebrate ourselves, especially in times and spaces where the world doesn't always celebrate us. In fact, the world tries to take pieces of us to modify. And so I really think it's important to celebrate yourself and, you know, embrace your own journey and not compare it to anyone else you see on social media, because the vast majority of them are lying, and they're also comparing themselves to everyone else. And so, you know, embrace the journey, embrace uncomfortable conversations, but more importantly, celebrate yourselves in the hard times and in the good times.
Yo.
Tiffany, was that your phone?
This is why
you rules in the beginning of this session that we needed to turn our phones off, and clearly you did not.
I did, and I don't know if someone is like hurting themselves, but there's no reason for you to call me 5 times. I am so sorry. I hope everyone had the opportunity to hear Jamira's brilliant and poignant message. There is no reason for that to have happened. So my apologies for that. They're like, what's wrong with people? I just don't understand. So I'm going to transition us now into questions that people have started to put into the chat room. We have one great question that I'm going to mention from Jamie. What advice would you give to an organizer and Black queer-led and serving organization that is trying to gain support from philanthropy and other Black organizations? Black LGBTQ plus orgs only get 5% of all LGBTQ funding and dollars.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Oh, my bad. What advice?
Oh, what advice? Okay, what advice? What is advice related to? Is it like how to get more funding, how to better tell your story?
Trying to get support from philanthropy and other Black organizations.
You know, I would actually say my advice is not to those activists or those organizations, the LGBTQ organizations, because y'all are actually doing the right thing. Y'all are doing the right work. Y'all are leading from a place of love and respect, and that are honoring and centering those at the margins. My advice is actually for the foundations. Foundations themselves uphold and support white supremacy every single day. It makes no sense that a lot of these foundations and charities are walking around with billions of dollars in their coffers, and yet are giving less than 10% of it specifically to Black-led, queer-led organizations. And so my advice for them is to move out of the way. We have reached a point in our culture where we understand the implications of why rich people give. Oftentimes a tax write-off, and it's not for the benefit of us. And so I think we need to demand for charities and foundations to do better, but also I would say us as organizations and individual activists, we need to find other ways to gain income without relying solely on these white-led institutions that don't really care about us. And if they do care about our issue, it's for like a 1-year, 3-year type of deal. And the money for the investment oftentimes isn't worth the time that we put into it. So how are we being innovative and creating other streams of income? Whether that's creating merch, whether that's doing workshops, whether that's doing consulting for a lot of these foundations and corporations that are looking to diversify their employee base. So, I think there's a number of ways to really think about how to be innovative without relying on white-led philanthropy organizations and corporations to give you money. Because believe me, I'm in a lot of those conversations, and the vast majority of them are trash. And they want to appear to be making impact, but they have no idea what that really means. I know it's only Tuesday and I'm exhausted.
So we have another question from Naru. I hope I said your name right. If I didn't, I am deeply sorry. Pivoting a little bit back to collective power. What do you think about starting our own political party to leverage the power of our collective Black vote?
I think that's cute in theory. I mean, in the sense of I definitely think we need to be organizing. The problem is our current system is a two-party system, right? My problem with a lot of folks in 2016 is that they voted with their morals and they decided to vote third party. Okay, but strategically that doesn't make sense because we have a two-party system and our system is currently structured for those two parties to win. If we want to create our own political party, it has to be a national effort where we're starting at the community level to build up to national attention. It's something that's going to take decades. It's definitely not something that's going to take years. But I also push back on my own answer and saying that, maybe my idea of progress and potential is also rooted in white supremacy. And I need to also question myself on whether or not I'm dreaming big enough or I'm dreaming with innovation that allows me to also see liberation as something that's more tangibly possible in the near future versus in the far distance future. So I hope that was helpful, but yeah, I think we should do it, but it's just how we do it and how long it's going to take for us to actually see change is the question.
So we got a question from our dear friends at Spelman who have been a continuous partner on this event. We've done some incredible work with them since last year. So thank you to the folks at Spelman. Have you been surprised, Jamira, by anything you've learned about yourself in the process of doing this work?
That I actually don't like people? No, I'm an introvert. So doing this work requires me to.
That's true.
It's so true. Yes, it is. I mean, I grew up in a very big household, so I'm I can appear to be enjoying I can have moments of enjoying other people's company, but how I recharge is oftentimes alone. And in this my puppy. But if there's one thing I've learned about myself over the last 15 years is that I would say that I am worthy. Right. I started this work out very much focused on Black men and boys. I grew up with 10 older brothers. So my lens about justice was always that the Black man was experiencing the most trauma, that Black men were treated the worst in our society. And to an extent that they are, but that was a very young-minded view of myself in the world, right? I didn't realize that, when Black men are arrested, Black women are oftentimes responsible for picking up the pieces and that we are oftentimes criminalized as well. And then we also deal with interracial violence in our own communities, in our homes. So I think what I've learned about myself is that while I can advocate for other people, I should also be advocating for women like me, for women who grow up in communities like mine, for other communities who are also marginalized. And I think being an activist requires you to also start to care about yourself in a way that society tells you not to. And so, yeah, I would say that I learned that I was worthy enough to also start rooting and fighting for Black women's issues, and it didn't have to be through the male gaze.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I'll add to that is we both come to this work deeply believing in the power of young folks. I'm believing that no change happens without them and their influence and their participation. Oh my gosh. And what I will say is, for me, it is to never forget the impact that you have on the young person's life. I see in this chat that one of my mentees from Philly, for over 10 years, I think I've known these young women show up, right? And they're watching us as we do this work on behalf of them, with them, and for them. So as we do this work, we cannot forget that people are watching. And we have to continue to do it in spite of the moment. We have to do it and bring them along. And to remember that once we have obtained that power, how do we bring those young people that are itching and fighting to get into spaces so that we no longer have to do that too? So
They're ready to lead. We just need to move out of the way.
and we don't even need to give them a seat at the table. They can create their own one.
Agreed.
So, Jamila,
Yes, thanks for having me.
you know,
We're gonna do this with drinks next time.
okay, we could do that. I just want to really just, thank you so much for joining this conversation, for bringing your honesty, your truth, your power, your story to this moment, and for bringing the dog. We appreciate every aspect of who you are and showing up as your authentic self. And we are honored to be in your presence, and thank you for all that you do on the ground for and with our people.
Tiffany, I really appreciated you for managing this conversation, and shout out to the previous panel. You all were dropping gems after gems, so it was my pleasure.
Thank you. I think you're gonna become like a image that no longer sees now. So I appreciate you for coming.
Go with God. Bye.
No, but honestly, I cannot express to you guys how incredible and grateful I am for my friend Jamira to join us in conversation tonight. But also I want to thank you guys. Thank you for joining us. I hope you were inspired and motivated by all the conversations from the first panel to this one. At Echo & Green, we are committed to investing our time, support, and knowledge in these dialogues because we know they are a powerful path toward advancing racial justice. I'm so grateful for the conversations we had around innovation and design and liberation for Black futures. Thank you to the incredible panelists and supporters who made this Black Innovator Talk possible. I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to my colleagues at Echo & Green, who will kill me for my phone going off, but it's not my fault, and who crafted this virtual masterpiece. Finally, we are so proud to host this with support of the American Family Insurance Institute for Corporate and Social Impact, and a special thank you to Nara Jordan. Again, thank you again to Spelman College, our dear, dear friend Gilo Tisdale over there, and to Twitter for their partnership. Although this event is coming to an end, don't let the conversation stop here. Keep it going, head to Twitter, head to Instagram, head to your families, have conversations, keep talking, keep learning, stay motivated, and also stay in touch. Follow us at Echo & Green on social media. Visit www.echoandgreen.org to stay tuned for Black Innovator Talks in 2021. But I can't leave you guys without another inspirational note from one of our very own fellows, William Jackson, who is the founder of Village of Wisdom. He is the creator of this t-shirt that I'm wearing, Black Genius. I encourage you all to go and get his product. He's a 2014 fellow and he's a friend. Will says, "We will go to places they told us we had no business going. We will do things they said we could never do. We will laugh and cry with the joy that 400 years of hate couldn't break." My friends, liberation is absolutely inevitable. Until next time, everyone stay safe, stay blessed, and have a wonderful night.